It was a night like any other on the desolate highways that crisscrossed through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver, been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for over a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night, I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog. The kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, concealing the world beyond. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I'd heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers, but I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is until that night. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed by an oppressive silence. The glow of my headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the side of the road. A man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes, big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man-creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I glanced back at him. That's when I saw it, the twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio mic to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. But to my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices, just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles and was sure that creature was far away and I will never met it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that the night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night. But sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. That's when I saw them again, 3 of those nightmarish creatures. They stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on the truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cabin lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths, wide open, emitted guttural growls that reverberated through the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensified, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me as the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of the physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance, even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon. I dared a glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread as I realized they had a boundary, a limit to their reach. I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. But the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city light seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog, with a newfound paranoia. The city lights gradually faded in the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life, the sudden sound making me jump. It was a voice, a fellow trucker. "Hey, you there? You okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're not alone. We've all heard those stories, the abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog. But we always thought they were just stories." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged: those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the face of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. As I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures, a sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me: this road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance, they were bound by time, forever haunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black eyes bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crackled to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway claimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dared to traverse, and even fewer escaped.